Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern Bar Cart.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Welcome to episode 184 of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Modern Bar Cart CEO Eric Kozlik. Thanks for joining us for another interview episode where we track down the best and brightest minds in the spirits and cocktail world so that we can share their secrets with you. This time around, I chat with bourbon writer Brent Joseph of Bourbon and Banter about a recent article series he's written called Is Bourbon Broken? Obviously, there's an implication here that something is rotten in the state of Kentucky, in all states for that matter, but before we start getting all controversial up in here, let's give you the chance to make yourself a drink. This episode's featured cocktail doesn't have anything to do with bourbon. In fact, it's not even a cocktail, but rather a traditional palate cleanser and tequila accompaniment called sangrita. Not sangria, sangrita. It means little blood, and it's something that Brent and I delve into during the lightning round. Now, this is the sort of thing where everybody has their own recipe, at least commercially and here in the US. But according to Jeffrey Morgenthaler, the authentic recipe originates in Jalisco and includes sour oranges, pomegranate juice, hot sauce, and chile powder. Unfortunately, sour oranges are kind of hard to source, so Morgenthaler reverse engineered a recipe that he thinks is pretty close to the genuine article. To make it, you'll need 1 ounce of orange juice, fresh squeezed, 3/4 to an ounce of lime juice, also fresh squeezed, a 1/2 ounce of real pomegranate grenadine. Check out the True Grenadine Syrup by Pratt Standard on our e-commerce store for an excellent high-quality option, and 3 dashes of hot sauce or a 1/4 teaspoon of pasilla chili powder. Note that this is for a single 2 to 3 ounce serving, so scale this recipe as needed, combine the ingredients, chill them down, and serve alongside your happy hour tequila shooter. Some sangrita recipes call for some muddled jalapenos or even habaneros. Some non-traditional formulations call for tomato juice, pushing it kind of in that clamato direction. And some of the more Instagram-driven expressions are served in hollowed out cucumbers, just to give you a few options to play around with at home. So now that you've got a month to practice your sangrita game before Cinco de Mayo, let's turn our attention back to bourbon and back to the interview. In this barrel-aged deep dive with spirits writer Brent Joseph, some of the topics we discuss include how Brent came to love bourbon and used his passion to propel himself into a senior contributor role at Bourbon and Banter, the recent retail experiences that led him to pose the titular question of his 4-part article series, Is Bourbon Broken? The economic and market forces that have led to massive demand for particular brands and bottles, and the subsequent perverse incentive to flip them for outrageous prices on the secondary market. The role that social media has played in the fetishization of certain bottles and purchasing habits. How to be a smarter bourbon shopper and a better citizen of the bourbon community, and much, much more. A few disclaimers before we jump in. Nothing that Brent or I say in this interview is right or wrong. We're very clear about that. We are spirits enthusiasts, not polemicists. But we do point out one or more very well-defined trends in the bourbon world and pick apart the forces that might be contributing to them. So if you've ever flipped a bottle of bourbon for more than it's worth, or dropped everything and sped to the liquor store when they posted on social media about Blanton's being back in stock, we're not asking or expecting you to change a thing. You do you. But if, like me and Brent, you're a little alarmed at some of the trends you're seeing in the bourbon market, hopefully by the end of this episode, you'll understand what you can do to make sure that at the very least, you're not contributing to the problem. This is a conversation about value on many levels and about how assumptions we make and stories we tell ourselves can have a massive impact on America's spirit and the entire industry that exists to make sure our glasses are filled with spirits that make us happy. With that, please enjoy this conversation with bourbon writer Brent Joseph. Brent, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's just start by having you introduce yourself to our listeners and give us a rundown of who you are and what you do.
My name is Brent Joseph. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I like bourbon a lot. That led me to become a senior contributor for bourbonandbanter.com, which is basically bourbonbanter.com, even though we call it Bourbon and Banter. I've been doing that for about 5 years or so now, 5.5 years, I think. I've been writing for them. It just kind of came to me, kind of happenstance. I'm a big bourbon fan. I've got a degree in journalism through the University of Kansas. It's not that I have any published writing or works before. Otherwise, I saw a Twitter request online for this blog that I followed that was Bourbon and Banter. It said, hey, we're looking for new contributors and writers. And I gave it a whirl and submitted a sample piece and had to do another one. And, years later, here we are. So background on me, I used to be in the restaurant industry, owned my own restaurant for about 14, 15 years. Got to the point where I just was making just enough money to pay everybody else and a little bit for myself. And I got really sick of having to deal with restaurant industry employees and paying people out of my pocket to do a less than stellar job. And I kind of got fed up with it. And then I started a couple years ago in fall of 2018, right before I closed the restaurant, I started a private barbecue catering company locally. So private events, parties, things like that, that I can run pretty much by myself. Everything is made to order. It's all custom smoked to order and purchased to order. So that's kind of where we are. Through that, I also do private bourbon tastings or hosted bourbon tastings if people or company or events want to hire me out for that. I've done that as well.
Nice.
And it's kind of, it's just developed a palate and I can talk about it at length. Sometimes my friends tell me I'm a little too wordy, but that's just kind of where we are currently.
Nice. Well, bourbon, barbecue, obviously a great pairing.
Yeah, it goes well together.
And it seems like your experience in the restaurant world at least gave you an advantage over what we might call non-industry consumers in that you sort of had to work with beverage distributors. You understood a little bit more in depth how the 3-tier system worked. And so it makes sense why, you're able to jump into bourbon and develop not only a palate because you work in the flavor arena, but also to sort of, speak about it not only from a consumer standpoint, but also as somebody who can zoom out and see the big picture. And I think some of that is what we're going to be talking about here today. So why don't you just let our listeners in on the project that you're currently working on, this 4-part series for Bourbon and Banter, and introduce us to, I guess, the central thesis, which is pretty simple.
Yeah, basically, I've got a 4-part series going for Bourbon and Banter that is titled Is Bourbon Broken? And it's something that's been on my mind, or it's kind of been a theme that I've heard recently more than I had cared to. And I kind of decided to kind of get into it once. There was one specific event that happened locally that we can get into a little bit. I talk about it in actually part 3 of the article. And the third one just went up today. So the fourth one will be out probably this week, I would imagine. And it's generated a fair amount of shares and traction online and a healthy amount of dialogue as well between people that agree and there's people that don't agree. And basically, I kind of break it down into a few parts, and it's the retail side, the consumer side, which actually is kind of 2 different parts of that, as well as the secondary market and then the distribution side. And the distribution side, I go into a little bit, like we talked about the 3-tiered system. The reality is that as a consumer, there's not a whole lot we can do about that at this point. There's so much money and so many politics involved and people involved and companies involved that not only the lobbyists, but it involves grocery stores, and it involves C stores, and it involves liquor stores, and and everybody wants to keep things at least as status quo as possible because that's where people are making the most money. I live in Indiana, and until just a couple of years ago, there were no alcohol sales on Sunday. The blue laws are kind of ridiculous. I know every state's got a bunch of weird laws, and it was the fact that grocery stores couldn't sell liquor at the time prior to a couple of years ago and couldn't sell beer on Sundays because the liquor stores weren't open on Sundays because the liquor stores had the monopoly on that. And then there were lots of stupid arguments like, well, we don't want our employees to have to work an extra day of the week. Well, the reality is that in a free market, like, hey, someone that owns liquor store X, like, you don't have to be open on Sunday. Just know that everybody else has the option to be open on Sunday. And they didn't like that. Like, well, the grocery stores are open longer than us, or they can sell more than us, or have more buying power than us. And the reality is, like, in a free market, like, I mean, capitalism's a good thing. Like, a rising tide floats all boats. Like, I mean, tough shit, like, I'm sorry. Like, if you want to buy it, I would much rather be able to buy it from 10 different places and me choose where I spend my money for whatever reason, whether it be closer or whether I like the cashier or the owner or they're nice to me, rather than the place that, they're a jerk, right? And that's kind of how it works. And there's just too much behind that to do anything about the three-tier system at this point. So I touch on that in the series, but we kind of lean heavily towards a couple other issues, and that being the retailers, the consumers, and then the secondary market as well, which is obviously driven by consumers and sometimes fed by retail. It's kind of a vicious cycle type deal. So,
yeah. When I had an interview a few months ago with a gentleman who actually published a book on a lot of these weird laws, Jarrett Dieterle, one of the things we talked about was the cycles of perverse incentives. And I think that's exactly what you're referring to when sort of the retail side of things can drive the secondary market. I know that in your first piece, you spoke about an interesting little situation that you found yourself in that I think we might want to dig into a little bit with a particular bourbon, Eagle Rare, which I happen to like. Unlike you, I tend not to enjoy the Buffalo Trace portfolio all that much, but Eagle Rare is a notable exception. That's one of their products that I happen to really enjoy. It's one of the bottles that actually got me into bourbon in the first place. And so can you just describe, kind of what happened to you in that retail situation in part one of this article series?
Yeah, absolutely. And one, let me start off, Eric, by saying that I'm not right or wrong. Like, this is just my opinion, and they're my observations. Like, I'm not telling everybody that, hey, bourbon is broken. Well, I mean, maybe I am a little bit, but it's my opinion, right? Like, this is not a gauntlet that's thrown down and be like, oh, now it's over. Or like, you might as well give up. Like, everybody feel free to disagree. We welcome conversation on Bourbon and Banter. Like, it's about the banter. And, I've had these conversations with lots of friends and lots of people sitting around drinking bourbon, and that's kind of one of the coolest things about it. So, back to your incident that you're referring to, we recently got a Total Wine in Indianapolis. It's the first one that I believe is in the state of Indiana. It opened up around November, and I wouldn't say it's not far away from me, but it's also not in necessarily like my regular like traffic pattern orbit, whatever. So I kind of have to go a little bit out of the way, not too far, but just enough that it's not always in my traffic pattern. And I happen to be in the area, and one morning, like before noon, running some errands or getting something, and I was like, I'll just pop in Total Wine. I'd only been there a couple times prior, and there's nothing wrong with Total Wine. Total Wine is a good retailer. They're very big. They're national. They have a lot of buying power. They have a VIP/rewards program that it works. Some people are going to like it more than others, but also like if you spend $30,000 a year at the liquor store, you should probably be treated better than I do because I don't spend that much money, right? Like, even if you spend $100 or $200 a month, which is a good amount of money at a liquor store, that's pennies compared to what some people spend. And it's just, someone's always going to have a nicer car. Someone's going to always have a nicer house, a fancier watch, whatever it is, right? Their pool's going to be bigger. It's just the way things go. So I go into I go into Total Wine, and I go to the bourbon aisle and walking by, and I glance over, and there's 2 bottles of Eagle Rare on the shelf, which unfortunately anymore is not the norm. And it used to be like not even an issue to walk in and there'd be bottles of Eagle Rare on every shelf of every liquor store and probably most grocery stores that you walk in. It's there. It's good. It's 10 years. It's Buffalo Trace. It's 90 proof. Like, it's in my wheelhouse. I really like it. It's probably like, would be considered an everyday drinker for me. If someone said like, what was one that that you just drink every day if you had it, the price is not exorbitant and if it's readily available. So I was like, oh, cool, Eagle Rare. All right, I'll grab a bottle. And immediately I walk down the aisle. I got the bottle in my hand. I'm kind of browsing, see what else they got, And someone else I hear walks right, in the meantime, as I'm walking down the aisle, I see a guy in front of me also has a bottle in his hand. I just, and then 2 people walk up behind me as I'm just, halfway down the aisle, and they go crazy. Oh my God, look, dude, look, they got Eagle Rare, And I was like, what, really? Like, it's that deep, right? And I don't even, I'm like, what's going on? This guy's like, oh, they only have 1. Man. And they definitely grab the bottle and they're talking about it. Like, I wonder if they got any more. And they're all excited. And I was like, kind of thinking to myself, like, it's not that deep. It's Eagle Rare. And so the next thing you know, one of the guys at Total Wine does a good job of, all their employees, like, oh, hey, so you find everything you need? Can I help you? And he's like, dude, you got any more Eagle Rare? And he's like, well, there's a little sign that says limit 1 per person per day. And he's like, let me check. He's like, it's kind of an odd day. We normally only get shipments on days X and Y, but today's, day Z, and we happen to get some in. And so the guy comes back with a case of 6 bottles or what's left, and he's holding the box. I don't know how many were in there. Gives the other guy, the other gentleman that's with the first guy that got a bottle, and they're thrilled. Like, oh, we both got one. Yeah. I was like, really? Like, oh my God. And the next thing you know, there's like 4 people huddled around the employee from Total Wine, and he's already passing up the bottles as fast as he can get them out of the box, and the box is empty, right? He's like, oh, that's all we got. And everybody's like, whoa, we got Eagle Rare. And I'm like, what the hell? So I just kind of go about my business, and I think I bought something else, and I check out and I leave. And I get in the car, and I'm like, think about it a little more. I'm like, man, am I really that lucky today? Did I hit the lottery today? Like, is this like such a big deal that people are just going that crazy for it? And I was like, man, like, this sucks. Like, this used to be something that I could, and not like, I'm not talking 10 years ago. I'm talking like 2-3 years ago. Like, this wasn't considered allocated by any stretch of the imagination. And you can just walk in and grab a bottle. You grab 5 bottles if you want. No one's going to say a word, right? It's like buying Jack, right? Like, there's a bunch of bottles and take them, whatever. And it's still reasonably priced, which is wonderful. But it's just that much harder to get, to the point now where some liquor stores keep it behind the counter. Didn't even put it on the shelf, right? Like, you have to ask for it. Like, come on, that's where we are. Like, you have to ask for Eagle Rare now. And, Blanton's, like, you talk about Blanton's. People go absolutely crazy for this stuff. And it used to be my absolute favorite bourbon there is. And it's not anymore, and not because of market situations or secondary market or anything like that. The reality is, like, I just don't think that the juice they're putting in bottles or the bourbon they're putting in bottles is nearly the quality that it was 4, 5, 10 years ago when I really fell in love with it.
Can you pause really quickly and just explain what allocated means to our listeners who maybe aren't as deep into bourbon as perhaps you or I are?
Sure. Allocated is any bottle that they call it on allocation that is limited, probably now by the distiller, also by the distributor, to the liquor store chains or each individual liquor store. They may get much less of it. It's not like Miller Lite or Budweiser where it's just on the shelf all the time. It is something that is produced in smaller quantities, usually a little more of a premium item, But what happens is these liquor stores and the distributors dole them out kind of as treats, incentives to buy certain things. Now, for example, the distributors, like in order to get Pappy Van Winkle, they want you to buy, like we talked about, like you mentioned earlier, the underbelly, the kind of the deep-seated side. Like you have to buy X number of cases of a product that is much cheaper, that's more volume, to get rewarded with a bottle or two bottles or a case of Pappy or anything from the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection, stuff that's much rarer, much more limited, maybe only comes out once, twice, 3 times a year. I mean, that's kind of an allocated product. And even though I don't think Eagle Rare is technically an allocated product, I think they ships when they get it. It's not that rare, but what's happened with the demand and the secondary market and these retailers capitalizing on it is they've made it into an allocated product. So when a store keeps it behind the counter or in the back and they don't put it out and you have to ask for it, and a lot of times when you ask for it, they tell you no because you're not a good enough customer. They don't know you. I mean, that's one of those things that we're talking about here. Anything, like Weller 12 or Weller Special Reserve even, and I think that's the biggest joke there is in bourbon that people, and it's going to be controversial, but people go absolutely bananas for Weller Special Reserve, which is Buffalo Trace's wheated recipe. All of the Weller line is their Buffalo Trace's wheated recipe, which is what the Pappy Van Winkle line comes from. Now, it's basically the same stuff, but it's from honey barrels. It's aged longer. It's it's the special, the cream of the crop of that stuff. But the reality is, in my opinion, that the Weller Special Reserve is nothing more than Buffalo Trace's version of Maker's Mark.
That's exactly what I was just going to say.
It is not special. Now, if you're in the state of Texas, it's pretty much available on the shelf at retail all day long in almost every liquor store you go into. But in Indiana or other states, it is not. They keep it behind the counter, and they offer it to you as like some type of incentive, like you've just hit the Powerball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, exactly. And I think this entire conversation centers around what we might call a question of value, right? And one way to talk about value would be to talk about the market forces, right? We've been touching on some of those. I think we're going to touch on more of them. Another way to think about value might be the squishier, more subjective type of value, right? The type of values that lead you to say that Weller is just kind of Buffalo Trace's Maker Mark, or the type of value that makes the person behind you in the bourbon aisle super jazzed to see that bottle of Eagle Rare. You're looking at that bottle of Eagle Rare and you're saying, oh, what a nice surprise. I'm going to grab one. And I'm really glad that the price is not jacked up. And the person behind you gets, like you said, it's like they won the Powerball. The fact that they got this bottle of what not too many years ago was sort of a commonplace bottle. And so when I think what happens when we look at this subjective type of value is we have to raise the question, what has happened in the intervening time period that caused that shift, that caused it to go from what we might call a daily sipper to something that is highly prized? Do you care to comment on maybe what that might be, or what any number of reasons might have caused that shift?
I think it's definitely the major thing is social media and the internet. And I don't want to sound like when I've talked about this with a couple other people, they're like, okay, old man, you're just yelling at the kids to get off your lawn. Like, I'm not that old, 46. I've been drinking bourbon for 26, 27 years, depending on who you talk to legally and whatnot. And I started out, obviously not drinking the really good stuff. I started out, mixing with Coke and everything else. But I really think that social media and the proliferation of information has contributed to this, and in a there's good and bad about it. Like, because of it, I'm able to do this, right? Like, I wouldn't be talking to anybody, on a podcast or on multiple podcasts that I've done, and writing articles and putting them out online and having followers on social media, without it, which is awesome. Like, I've developed, I've found out and discovered a ton of new information and discovered new bourbons and made new friends and all kinds of stuff because of it. But at the same time, that information being out there and readily available within a second has definitely contributed to some of the hype and media the hype and the excitement of all of this that has contributed to it. And that's, you can view it twofold. It's a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's also bringing more people into the fold. More people are excited about bourbon. And because of that, over the last 10 or 12 years, or even more than that, obviously bourbon has exploded and it's become much more popular. And because of that, all of the distilleries have expanded in tremendous ways. Their gift shops have more offerings. You can get more gear. They're laying down more juice. They're building more rick houses. They're putting more bourbon in barrels every single day. The distillery capacity is increased by X number. There's also a lot of new craft distilleries, which is good, and it also can be bad as well. Someone commented on one of the articles I wrote that they likened it to the cigar boom of the early 90s, when cigars became really popular. All of a sudden, there were all these new companies and manufacturers and labels and brands, and it was a big deal. And I was participated in some of that as well. And it lasted a while. And someone said, how long is that going to, that lasted probably somewhere between 3 and 8 years until it really started to die down, and a lot of manufacturers folded and brands got snapped up or just went away. And they said, well, what about this? How long do you think this is going to last? I'm like, I don't see this slowing down anytime soon. It's probably, it may be here to stay, and this may be just where we're at. But also, what's the next hot thing to come out that everybody that has gotten onto the hype train jumps off and jumps on next, right? Like, and how, the other issue is, like, how many people are in it because they really enjoy bourbon, or they're just hunting it and collecting it because it's cool and they can show off to their friends online and take pictures or crotch shots in the parking lot with their bottle they just bought, and then, move on to the next thing, or make a few bucks, or make a bunch of money flipping bottles, and or is it something that is going to stay? Like, I don't know. The only time will tell on that. If I could see the future, I'd have a lot more money.
That's true.
But one of the good things is, like I said, like all these distilleries have been upping capacity for years and years now, and what I'm looking forward to is, hopefully, when all of that bourbon matures and now starts to get bottled and put on the shelves, is that going to make a difference? Or is there just that much more demand now that it's still going to stay the same? Like, it's been close to 10 years since Buffalo Trace has been laying down a whole bunch of more stuff and putting it in warehouses. What's that going to look like? Does that mean that all of a sudden there's going to be a big boon of Buffalo Trace? I'm sorry, but Buffalo Trace products, so like Blanton's and Eagle Rare and Elmer T and Rock Hill and Hancock. Like, is there going to be a lot more of that on the shelves? And then also, like, does that mean there's going to be more BTAC or more 10-year Pappy Van Winkle or 12-year Lot B that gets released annually because they're laying down so much more stuff? No one really has the answer to that yet. I'm looking forward to see what happens. I hope things come back down before, but right now some stuff's going nuts, and people are paying a lot of money on the secondary market, like well over retail, for stuff that, what I say is not worth it. That's just my personal opinion. Some people have a lot more disposable income. I for one, there's just so much good stuff out there that I refuse to pay over retail for pretty much anything.
Fair.
There's too much other stuff out there. I'm not going to pay $100 or $150 for a bottle of Blanton's when it's a $54 or $60 bottle, depending on where you are.
Sure.
I'd rather spend $150 on, a larger quantity of stuff that I know I'm going to drink. So,
Right.
And the other thing is, like, I don't really have shelf queens. Like, I don't buy bottles as an investment. I don't buy bottles to look at and necessarily to show off to friends. Like, I buy them to drink them, and I drink them with friends, and I enjoy it. It's a social thing. I really don't drink much by myself. I'll have a glass every once in a while here or there. But if my kids are around, I don't really count that as drinking by myself anyways.
So much good stuff there. I think it's important that you mentioned volume and how these distilleries perhaps haven't even begun to release some of the juice that they laid down when bourbon started really picking up steam. And so I think that is still very much an open question, because I think what people tend to forget about is how long it takes to make some of these really nice bourbons that we so enjoy to drink. So that's important, and that's something that I really want people to pay attention to, because with our short attention span, just because we're antsy doesn't mean that the bourbon's going to age quicker. That's a constant despite our shifting agendas and priorities as consumers. And so the bourbon industry can only really operate at a very set time lag. And we just have to sort of wait with that. Like I said, it's a constant. We just sort of have to wait and see what happens there. So like you, I'm curious to see what happens. To your point on social media, that was something I wanted to bring up. I haven't read your third article, which you said dropped today. So I don't know if you really address social media all that much in that one. But, one of the things that has been a fairly well-studied phenomenon in social media is the comparison effect, in that we only, if we're posting photos on our social media, you're not going to post a photo of yourself looking like garbage. You're gonna put, you're gonna make sure the light's good. You're gonna make sure you get your best side. And so what that looks like is this echo chamber of people being perfect. They're selectively posting these perfect things to social media, and that can cause, all sorts of weird things to go on psychologically. Now, you did say in one of your articles that you do prefer Instagram as your preferred medium because it's simple. Take a picture of bourbon. You're scrolling. You see a nice picture of a nice bourbon. Give it a little heart and then move on. Right? It's simple and it's sort of clean. It doesn't really muddy the waters like maybe a forum like Reddit or something like that. And I don't think that what's happening in bourbon is necessarily that comparison effect where, teenage girls are becoming depressed because they're seeing all these, chopped and modeled pictures. That you can't do that to a bottle of bourbon. A bottle of bourbon is a bottle of bourbon. But people aren't going to post shots of Jim Beam. They're going to post shots of their Wellers or things that they perceive to be of value. And so I think what's happening there is that is the little echo chamber that is causing these certain bottles to be what I would call fetishized. Do you think that's fair?
Absolutely. I can't say that I've never done that. That I've posted it like, hey, look what I got, or look what I lucked into, or like, ship came in, like I got this. But I will tell you that I'm pretty sure that every single bottle that I've ever taken a picture of, if it wasn't open, it is now open or it is gone. Because, I can think back, like 8 years ago, 10 years ago, like came across a bottle of Pappy 23 at retail, bought it, took a picture of it. I for sure did that. And if you scroll back, I'm sure that's on there somewhere. So I can't say that I'm not guilty of it, but recently, like I don't know. I don't want to say it's not me because before looking at it, be like, see, you're a liar. I don't want to do that. But at the same time, like there is a bit of, I wouldn't say fear of missing out or jealousy or like topping one another. Like no one takes a picture of their bar on Instagram in poor condition. They line their bottles up. They get the good light. Like, they want to flex. They want to show off, which is good. You know what? Like, you spent your money. You know, it's yours. You're proud of your collection. Like, that's good. I'm not taking that away from you or any of your thunder. But if none of those bottles are open and you don't plan on opening any of those bottles and it's just a showpiece for everybody online or on Facebook or your friends or your neighbors, like, then you're part of the problem. Like, drink those things.
Yeah.
You know, and if you're doing it for an investment, fine. Like, you know, like people, you know, somebody got mad at me because in one of the articles, you know, I started criticizing the secondary market or saying that it was part of the reason why bourbon is broken. It's led to that is, you know, the guy got mad. He's like, so what if I want to spend my money on that? Who are you to tell me? You know, people collect guns and cars and bottles of wine that they don't open. And the guy's absolutely right. Like, I'm not telling you shouldn't or you can't. I'm just saying that is part of, you know, what has led to the problem that where we are now. Like, you are contributing to that. Like, I'm not telling you you're wrong. I'm not telling you can't do it, where to spend your money. But, you know, like you said, like, no one's taking a bad picture, you know, like, they're making it look good, right? Like, they're putting the filter on it and, you know, like, and it's a thing, and I get it. But again, there seems to be, when you mentioned the Instagram thing, like, it's less of a forum for arguing as much as there is on Facebook. Now, you mentioned Reddit. I don't touch Reddit. Like, I can't even go there, right? Like, it's kind of like the comments on YouTube, right? Or like the comments on the local newspaper's website. Like, if you want to get to the lowest of the low and the bottom of the bottom, like, Reddit is definitely above those, but not too far.
No.
And I'm not criticizing anybody that's on Reddit. I'm just saying, like, I'm just not going there. I can't. I don't have time for, you know, to mess with that.
You know what I did actually is as a way to keep myself honest is I actually use the same handle as I do on Instagram at Quixologist, and I put my picture on the Reddit profile, so it's like, no, you know what, I know that this is an anonymous forum, but I'm gonna take that temptation away from myself and just be straight up, and so if I say something, it's no longer anonymous. So that's kind of
I agree with that. Like, I don't, you know, I'm definitely not a keyboard tough guy and hide behind my, you know, internet handle or anything like that. Like, you know, it's my opinion. I'm allowed to have it, and you're allowed to disagree, and, you know, have an open dialogue and go on. But yes, Instagram is kind of one of the ones that I prefer, just because, like, Facebook has gotten so political, so siloed in what you can see and what you view. Like, there's so many algorithms and there's so much money behind it that, like, you know, I don't even know how many friends I have on Facebook. I don't really like to use it very much. I've been forced to use it the last week or two with the blog and posting stuff to Facebook and responding to comments just to help clicks in the blog and everything. But I know I have hundreds of friends on Facebook, and I see a very small portion of any of those people, like, you know, 5 or 10%, I would imagine. Like, I don't even know, like, some of the people that I've, you know, and I know they're probably posting, but I don't go chasing it down either. It's just the algorithm and everything else that Facebook does keeps you in such a narrow field of what you see and what other people see, that, you know, how much of that stuff's actually getting out there. And then on top of that, it's, you know, like I said, Facebook has been so highly politicized, you know, especially after the last presidency and the election. You know, people get so heated, and I don't want to get involved in that. I just hate it. So.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, and I'm a strangely visual person when it comes to thinking about abstract things like patterns. And I know patterns, you know, if you map it out on a graph, maybe it's very visual, and maybe that's why I tend to think visually, but we're talking about this set of perverse incentives in the bourbon world where, you know, one thing will reinforce another thing, and it kind of loops back and creates this self-perpetuating trend. And now we're talking about, like, for example, the politics of Facebook, of how, like, you know, it's very binary, very black and white, very red versus blue. And one of the things that makes me think about is, like, are we in a thought trench when it comes to bourbon. Do we have blinders on to maybe something that we might be missing out on? And I suspect that we do, because I have a controversial view that I want to throw out and see what you think of it. I'm certainly not asking you to agree with this, but my controversial view in this discussion might look something like, I think bourbon is just fine as a commodity. I think bourbon, in fact, is a better commodity spirit than it is a luxury spirit. And I think one of the things that people are doing right now is that we're trying to like push it into this, luxury category, such that a bottle of Eagle Rare, which was a commodity just a few years ago, is suddenly something that people are celebrating like this trophy. I think bourbon is great, but I think it's so accessible in terms of the very desserty flavor profiles that it tends to have, that it can do better as a commodity spirit than most spirits on the globe. And so I guess I'm a little confused by the impulse to try and make it seem more expensive or more luxurious than it is, when there were fine daily sippers that weren't luxury. So I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
It does. I think a couple things on that. I think there are still plenty of daily sippers that are fine and that you could view as commodities that are just always going to be there. As far as luxury items, there are people forcing it that way, because there are so many people in the secondary now, or in the bourbon game, that are fans of bourbon, however you want to refer to it, that are treating it like stock. They're treating it like stocks, like for the stock market. Like, hey, I can get this for X, and I'm going to sell it for Y and make a bunch of money, and then do it again and keep going. And that's what a lot of people are doing. And there's people that spend their days driving around to different liquor stores, buying up all they can, and coming back home, getting on Facebook, taking pictures, selling it for more than they bought it for, and doing it all over again. Hell, we did that with Beanie Babies years ago, right? Like, it lasted for a while, but like, how long is that sustainable? I don't know. Is it, like we talked about before, like, is it sustainable until there's a lot more product on the market, or does that just keep fueling it? That I don't know. As far as your comment about, pushing it one way or the other, or how you view it as a commodity, like, people like what they like. Like, if that's what you like to drink and that's your favorite spirit, I don't know if you're all of a sudden going to be like, now gin is hot, I'm going to drink only gin. Like, if you're used to drinking bourbon, like, you're going to keep drinking bourbon. Just like people aren't going to go from coffee to, now it's not coffee, I'm going to go to kombucha instead, right? Like, you may drink it as well, but, if you're a Diet Coke drinker, you're going to keep drinking Diet Coke. You're not going to all of a sudden switch to Sunkist,
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's completely different. And there are definitely products in that commodity sphere that are luxury, that definitely fall into that category, just like Scotch, right? Like, the underage or not as hyper-age stuff is a lot cheaper and a lot more readily available because it doesn't take as long to make. It doesn't take, the painstaking process to go through it. So I don't disagree necessarily with that statement, but I think there's ways that you can kind of pick that apart, and certain parts of it more than others, yes and no. Everything's a commodity, right? Like, it just depends. It's a supply and demand thing at this point. And I'm not an economics major, but I do know that if more people want it than it's available, it's going to cost more.
Yeah, or you're going to have to work harder to find it.
Well, that's absolutely. But now some of that has gone away because of the internet, like we've talked about, and social media. Like, there's Facebook groups that, for example, there's like 4,400 or some people in the local bourbon Facebook group, right? And it's enough. And I know guys that, one guy just told me the other day, he's like, I sit at work at home and I work from my home office and I've got two screens that I work from at home. He goes, and I have a laptop open with that page open from the local bourbon group, and it refreshes every couple of minutes. And when someone posts a picture, hey, I got this bottle here, and they're, showing off that they got it in the parking lot, he's like, I get in the car and I go buy it, right? And he drinks it, which is great, and he shares it, which is awesome too. But that is kind of part of this issue, right? Like when the local grocery store got a store pick of Old Forester, they put out 156 bottles, I think, or something like that. It was gone in less than 3 hours because somebody posted online in the local Facebook page, and everybody ran there at lunchtime or whatever and bought as much as they could, and it was gone. 3 hours.
Mm. Well, it seems like social media is almost mirroring like how the brain works, which is, a good thing for the social media companies and perhaps a good or a bad thing for us. But, just like the brain has spreading patterns of activation. What you just described was a spreading pattern of activation. Your friend is one neuron, and then somebody posting on the Facebook group is another neuron. Suddenly one neuron zaps the other neuron, and the other neuron, so all of a sudden you have this, it's literally a digital version of the feeding frenzy that you described at the Total Wine.
Well, it's a bit of an addiction, right? Like it's just like gambling or, that instant gratification. And like some people like the hunt and successfully finding that like bottle, that coveted bottle more than drinking the stuff. And that's cool too, right? Like it's very similar to like how you maybe used to open, like at least me, like baseball card packs or football or basketball card packs when you were little, right? Like you'd go buy a couple packs, you'd save your money and get a couple packs, and you're looking for whatever that Ken Griffey rookie or whatever it was, right? Like, I got it. Like whatever that grail is, right? Mm-hmm. And then what do you do with that baseball card, right? You're not putting that one in the spokes of your bicycle. Like you're getting a piece of lucite and, putting it in there, or, a card protector, you're savoring it and you put it on your shelf or whatever. You look at it and you're proud that you scored it, right? Well, it's the same thing with bourbon. It's just whether you drink that bottle and enjoy it with friends, or whether you put it on the shelf and look at it and put it on Facebook and Instagram and show off and say, hey, look at me, or you turn around and sell it for a profit. Like it's, you kind of fall in one of those categories, and none of them are wrong. Like you're not bad for doing any of those things again, but a couple of those things definitely contribute to why it's harder to get what you want and what used to be a daily drinker. And again, like I'm not clamoring for the days where, you could buy Pappy on the shelf whenever you wanted, and I actually, like, there was a time where I found bottles of Old Rip 10 on the shelf and bought 2 bottles of it and drank one of them in a weekend and brought the other one home. It was the old squat bottles, and it was awesome. That happened once, right? Like, it was literally on the shelf in the aisle. I didn't have to ask for it. Didn't have to hunt for it. It was just stumbled upon it. Mm-hmm. But those days are long gone. So I kind of focus in other areas rather than those ultra premium or coveted bottles. Again, like I enjoy drinking it and I like to share it with friends. So anything unique or fun or cool or stuff that I can find is what I kind of go after now.
I like what you're saying about, how there are different types of people, and some people are the people who get that rush of finding something that's, we might just call it generically rare, something rare, whether it's rare because of price or because of scarcity. I am not that kind of person. In fact, I hate going shopping for pretty much anything. Like my reward is not getting, like, I'm not going to be the kind of person who goes to the car dealership and is like, all right, time to bargain and get this salesperson down a couple $100. I'm like, will a couple $100 get me home faster? Because that to me is my reward. So I guess my brain doesn't operate on that same chemical level of people who are, of the person that you mentioned who's just going to jump right out and literally race to the liquor store after seeing a post on Facebook. And I think one of the things I was trying to get at in my sort of little commodity rant earlier was I think that we may be mistakenly associating good with rare or expensive, or quality with rare or expensive, when I think sometimes good can just be simple, right? Good can be commonplace or simple. And I think that's what you were thinking with your, with your Eagle Rare thing. You're like, oh, here's something that at least at a certain point was commonplace, and it was good. It wasn't expensive, but it was good for what it was. There was something simple about being able to once again walk up to that shelf and pick up that $25 bottle of Eagle Rare. And so I think that is something that I would say might be healthy for people to think about. I don't think that we're ever going to return to days of yore where things were not as prized as they are today. But I think just pondering, is there a way I can drink something simple and still enjoy it? Might be just something worth asking. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think that, what you consider good, what I consider good, and what someone else considers good is all completely subjective to their palate, right? Like, what do you enjoy? Like you said, you don't normally care for a lot of the Buffalo Trace stuff. I like a lot of the Buffalo Trace stuff. I don't care as much for some of the Old Forester stuff, right? Some people love that stuff. There's a few other products that I really enjoy, and there's a lot of the other stuff that it's not stuff that I would ever really reach for. But again, it's up to your own individual taste. And that's what's so cool about bourbon, is that there's so many options out there. Is you can find one that you like. If you try enough, and you're not just out there trying to figure out what the popular one is that the internet group says, or what your Facebook group says, or what you hear from someone in an article. Try new things. Like, and that's part of the whole, like, our hashtag for Bourbon and Banter is Drink Curious. Like, try different things. Find out what you like. One of the cool things about the Bourbon and Banter blog is that I think there's 12 or 15 of us that all write, and everybody does different reviews. One of the cool things that people ask about, they're like, well, if you like it, like, should I go buy it? Like, not necessarily. Like, what I encourage people to do is to go through and read some of the different reviews from all of the different writers. And some of our articles have multiple reviews, or some of our, bottles have multiple reviews. So you can kind of compare the tasting notes between me and someone else, and maybe even a third person. And if you know that you have that bottle on your shelf, or you've had that, whatever it is, and let's say you like it, and one of the reviewer likes it, and two of the other ones don't like it, then maybe you should focus, or opposite actually, either way, you should focus on some of the other articles they've written, or the other reviews they've written, and kind of see if there's something in there that, if you agree with more of them, or if you don't. And if you agree with a lot of them, like, go find something that one of us reviewed and try, that you haven't had, and go try that and see if that lines up with your palate and your taste. And that's what leads you to discover more brands, different bottles, different product lines. And the same thing, like, if you know that you don't like something and someone else loves it, that may be a reviewer that, like, your palate and your taste don't line up exactly the same way. That's kind of one of the things that we try to encourage people is just, try different things. Find out what you like and what you don't. There's no wrong answer. Just because your favorite drink, or the favorite thing you like to sip on, is a $20 bottle, doesn't mean that you have a bad palate, and it doesn't mean that just because your friend that only drinks Blanton barrel picks, that he only buys exclusively online from private groups and spends 15 times more a month than you do on bourbon, doesn't mean his palate's better, or that you're wrong. Like, it's just, everybody's got different tastes, and that's good. That's one of the reasons there are so many different products out there and available.
Right. And I think anything you can do to discourage monoculture, whether that's a literal monoculture or a monoculture of thought or opinion, I think is important. So drinking curiously is definitely something that I agree is super important. And think drinking curiously and maybe finding value in the commonplace might be a couple things that drinkers could do to maybe combat this sense that we're living in an internet echo chamber that's filled with Pappy Weller and the like. This episode is brought to you by Near Country Provisions. If you're like me, here are some things you might be like. You live in the Mid-Atlantic. You enjoy meat. You highly prefer that your meat is local, sustainable, and comes from ethically raised animals. And you'd absolutely love for someone to deliver it to your door once a month. If this sounds like you, then you need Near Country Provisions in your life. Head over to nearcountry.com and check out their different, highly customizable meat delivery packages, and also browse their growing seafood selection. As a thank you for being a Modern Bar Cart listener, you can get 2 free pounds of ground beef or bacon included in your first order after subscribing if you enter the code BARCART, all one word, at checkout. That's BARCART, BARCART, at checkout. Near Country Provisions is the real deal, and I can honestly say that I'd recommend them even if they weren't a sponsor. The meat and the local farmers they work with are just that good. Now, back to the show. So I want to just give people a sense. Of course, we're going to be linking to the 3 articles that you've published so far. And then when the 4th article goes up on Bourbon and Banter, we'll get all of those on the show notes page over at modernbarcart.com/podcast. But can you just, for me and the listeners, talk about articles number 3 and 4? Just give us a quick rundown of what those are going to cover so we know what we're in for.
3 goes over the retailers, and it covers an incident that kind of was the main reason for writing this article. The incident about finding the Eagle Rare kind of kicked it over the edge. But the main reason that this happened, like there was something that happened recently with a retailer locally, and I go into it in the article, as well as it covers kind of the main group of different liquor stores here locally in the Indianapolis market. There's a handful of them that are kind of the big players, and I kind of highlight the differences and what some of the issues are as far as how they treat their customers, whether there's a VIP program, whether they overcharge, there's one liquor store that pretty much blatantly, if you get the right person talking, admits that they don't put any of the allocated stuff out. They take all the stuff that everybody really wants, don't put it on the shelf. They put it upstairs and they sell it all online at secondary pricing. And, I guess it's their right. It's their product. They're in business to make money. But that's not, in my opinion, the way you gain customers or treat your best customers as well. I don't spend money there. So it's one of the reasons why I don't spend money there. Not only do they kind of overprice things, and they basically blatantly just don't put that stuff out there. And it's one thing to save it for your really good customers, like we talked about before. Like if you're spending a lot of money every month or annually and have developed relationships, which, is the key to any liquor store, I think, is developing a relationship. But if, I've got a buddy that spends a whole lot more money than I do, and he drinks a lot of wine. I don't drink any wine. And he spends a lot more money than I do. And we drink together, probably at least, once a week, if not more than that. And, he ended up with a bottle of Pappy 15 at retail, which is awesome that some of these liquor stores are selling those bottles at retail and saving them for their VIP or their best customers. They deserve it. That's kind of what it is. There's a few different ways to do that, whether it's a VIP program or whether it's at the discretion of individual store managers that treat their, local regular customers, or if you do basically an online, not an online or a lottery, basically. All of those things are pretty fair. And I have no problem with a store basically selling or giving away raffle or lottery tickets. There's different ways to do it. For every bottle you buy, $25, $50, $100 you spend, you get an extra ticket. It rewards spending, and that's a rewards program, and that's great. But when it gets to be a little shadier, that's kind of where, things contribute to the issue of bourbon being broken. And I go into that a little more in Article 3. Article 4 is another kind of basically I called it the second consumer problem. Like, it's another problem that there is with the consumer from a little bit of a different angle. And some people will not like it because they are those people. And I kind of say it like, hey, like, if you're guilty of doing this or doing this, like, you're part of the problem. You're not wrong for doing it, but you're part of the reason that I think that we are in the situation where bourbon may be broken. So some people are going to like it, and some people are going to be like, yeah, I completely agree. And some people are going to, want to come for me maybe with pitchforks and torches. but we'll find out. So that kind of wraps it up. The reality is, like, I banged this whole thing out and made it one article, and it was huge. I mean, it was like 3,500 words or something. And Pops, who runs the Bourbon and Banner blog, was like, dude, he's like, this is too long. Like, we got to break this up. Like, I'm gonna have to chop this up. And it's your show, whatever you want to do. So he decided to break it up into 4 pieces and a little more manageable or bite-sized chunks. And it has, definitely generated a little bit of buzz, and some people are definitely more people have agreed with me than have disagreed with me. Maybe because some people don't want to publicly put themselves out there and be like, I disagree. I love overspending on the secondary and driving up the prices. Like, I don't know how many people are going to necessarily want to out themselves and admit to being part of the problem, like I've said, or like I've titled the article or the series. I don't know. No one wants to be called out like that, but some people have definitely disagreed, but it's been a pretty positive feedback that I've gotten on the whole, which is good.
Yeah, that's great. Referring to the 4th article, we're talking about the second, or perhaps the second set of consumer problems. I think a useful question just in life is to ask, to what degree am I either responsible for or contributing to the circumstances which I claim not to like, So, right. Not everybody is participating in the secondary market and flipping bottles for way more than they should ideally be priced. But, are you the person who solely takes the pictures of the pretty bottles? Well, kind of we all are. So we all are in certain ways contributing. And so I think at least what your articles have allowed me to do, as somebody who is a bourbon enthusiast, but certainly not to the degree that you are, certainly not as involved with the community as you are, it's allowed me to put definite names and definite kind of identities on some of these problems, and it has allowed me to consider my relationship to them. And I think that's all that we can really ask of a series like this one. And so to that extent, I think it's a great success, and I've really enjoyed reading the first 2. And as soon as we hop off, I'm gonna read article number 3. So thank you so much for putting this all together for us.
Oh no, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the time to chat, and as well as the exposure to the article. More people listening, reading, viewing, looking is always good. But with that 4th article, it doesn't really focus on the secondary market necessarily. That was, I think, more the first article. It's another issue where the consumer, I think, is contributing to some of these higher prices by willingly paying what the retailers are charging for some stuff that brand new, unproven, young craft product that is not very good. And along those lines, like, I'm sure there is a local brand or a local distillery that is selling their craft product or their new make or their young 2.5-year-old, or even their sourced stuff that they bought from someone else and put their label on it, and are charging $55, $65, $75 for. And we're encouraging that as a consumer. Some people are, by buying it. And there's one thing to support local. It's another thing to just keep buying bad product, right? And the reality is that a lot of this stuff out there isn't very good. A lot of people want to like it because they spent $75 on it. But when you put it next to something that's $20 or $25, a lot of times the stuff from the big guys, that's aged longer, that is cheaper just because it's made in bigger batches or it's slightly less proof, it's still going to taste better. And if you choose it blindly, that's one thing. If you choose it in a blind tasting better than all these other ones, like, cool. And I'm all for drinking curious, but drinking dumb is when you keep spending $75 on stuff that's no good, and you keep the cycle going by spending money on stuff that is overpriced. And at what point, I also asked the question, at what point do the big guys like Buffalo Trace or Jim Beam or Old Forester start saying, or Heaven Hill, like, hell, like all these consumers are paying $55 or $60 for stuff, and we have stuff that is a third or half the price, that is aged longer, that tastes better, has won more awards. Like, why don't we just triple the price or double the price on it? We don't even have to make any more. We'll double revenue overnight. And you've seen it happen with a few brands. Like Heaven Hill took their 6-year bottle and bond product off the market. It was $12, $13, $11 a bottle. They took it off the market. They brought it back. They rebottled it. They made it a 7-year product, and now they charge $45 for it. And I've had them both side by side. It's a little bit different, but it's not 4 times the price different or 4 times the price better, in my opinion. At what point does Buffalo Trace say, hell, a lot of these markets, we can't even, people are lining up for hours just because they heard we're going to put Buffalo Trace on the shelf. I know it's a problem in Virginia. That's an alcohol, control state. We've got one of our writers that's there, and he's like, dude, people line up for hours because they're getting Buffalo Trace today. It's nonsense. So why doesn't Buffalo Trace say, hey, we're going to charge $50 a bottle for Buffalo Trace, or $35 or $40, and see if you consumers eat it, right? Same thing with the Weller Special Reserve. Like, why charge $17 a bottle? We'll charge $30. If we're not careful, like, that's what's going to happen, because, the bean counters, they're in it to make money, right? The big distilleries are making money. And a lot of them are big publicly traded companies. All of them, in fact, except Heaven Hill. When do they say, let's just double the price or raise it $20 a bottle and see what happens, right? We don't even have to make any more. And then when we do make more, they're still going to buy it. If you're running the company and you're the one that's cashing those checks, it's hard to see the logic against that, because sure, us as consumers, like, we're just snapping it up as fast as people can and contributing to that. So that's kind of a little bit what that last article gets into, and stop spending money on bad stuff, or spend the money on the good stuff.
Yeah, and I like that sort of is the article that rounds out the series, because it provides a sense of exigence. It's like, well, we're already seeing this start to happen, like you said, with the Heaven Hill 6-year product. If we're already seeing this start to happen, this means that unless something changes, or unless we get concerned and maybe think about changing our approach to this, then this is going to continue to happen. And if I, like you, were so deeply invested in the industry and the community, I would be as precisely as alarmed as you are, and want to do something about it. So I think that's a great way to wrap this up. Is there anything that you want to add before we do a couple quick lightning round questions?
No, I think that, to wrap all this up, the best thing that you as a consumer or a bourbon drinker and a fan of bourbon can do is vote with your dollar. Whether it be at your local retailer, support the guys that are nice to you, that support you, that you have relationships with, whether it be a grocery store, a convenient mart, like what a liquor store that's close to you. Also, that works with supporting the brands that you like. Don't waste your money on the stuff that you're being overcharged for, young or bad product. I'm definitely, again, I'm all for trying new things. But maybe think about going in and splitting a bottle 3 or 4 ways with some friends. Have a bourbon share night where everybody brings a new bottle that no one's ever had, and everybody throws in some money that kind of mitigates the cost of that. And you can find something new that way. But definitely, so voting with your dollar helps with all of this. And also not spending your money, on the secondary to contribute to this vicious cycle, like that may be something you want to look at as well. But if you're doing it as an investment, I'm not going to stop you. This isn't going to sway your opinion at all anyways. Or if you're doing it to make money and you're flipping bottles, if you're listening to this, you're probably angry and, cursing me anyway. So you're not going to listen. So
For sure.
So yeah,
Cool.
vote with your dollar. It's kind of the,
Yeah,
Big
we
deal.
definitely advocate that. Don't. I love that last point. Don't. Why would you continue to drink juice that you don't like, or that's not as high quality as the price indicates? So yeah, voting with your dollar is actually surprisingly easy to do. We don't even realize that we're doing it every time we go to the liquor store, but you literally are. Every time you are in there, you are voting with your dollars. So you should actually think of it like that.
yeah, whether it be the brand or the local liquor store or the local liquor store chain, and it goes back to distributor and the distillery and all that.
Yeah, it cascades for sure. So jumping in with just a few quick lightning round questions. This is a cocktail podcast. You wouldn't know it. We were just talking about straight liquor for an hour here, but what's your favorite cocktail? And if you don't have a favorite of all time, what's something you're maybe more obsessed with recently?
Surprisingly, I'm not a huge cocktail guy. Normally, someone says, what's your favorite cocktail? It's bourbon, neat, right? But there are a few things I get into every once in a while. Around Derby season in the spring, mint julep is pretty solid. I like to make my own. I steep my own mint, so it comes out really strong and it's got a good flavor. Summertime's coming up. Sometimes it's hard to drink that barrel proof stuff right by the pool, neat. So I will get down with the Kentucky Mule every once in a while and do that right. But also, not necessarily a cocktail, but more of an accompaniment with tequila or mezcal is sangrita. A really good sangrita is fantastic to kind of cleanse the palate with tequila. I'm a big tequila fan as well. Not as big as bourbon, but it's kind of my second favorite spirit. If you could find someone that makes a good sangrita, or if you've got a recipe, you got to make your own, because it's not really too available commercially because it's so good fresh. But if you're not familiar with it, definitely look it up. Not sangria, not the brandy spiked wine with a bunch of fruit in it. We're talking similar to a Bloody Mary ish, but you use it to it's alcohol free, but use it to chase or cleanse your palate with tequila, with good sipping tequila.
Yeah, we'll have to put a recipe on the show notes for folks, because I was gonna clarify that this is not the sweet wine for sure.
No. And if you've got a good sangrita recipe, and I'd love to see it, because I'm always on the lookout to try some new ones, because it's good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Next question: is there any product or trend in the spirits or cocktail world that you think is underrated right now? And this could be in the bourbon world, or it can be some other segment.
I think mezcal is kind of an unsung standout. I think there's a lot of cool stuff that's being done with some of the craft mezcals that are around, but it really takes you got to like tequila, because it's got a bit of a tequila flavor, but it's a little smokier. It's got a little more mineral flavor to it. I like mezcal a lot. I think that's kind of one of them. Also, back to trend, I don't know if it's underrated, that's for sure, is private barrel picks in bourbon, or pretty much any spirits, is something that really you can find some unique gems. And I kind of focus that, my spending or my, what I try to find or private picks of bourbon barrels. Mm-hmm. You could find some gems or some special ones, or stuff that at least is slightly unique and just not the typical off-the-shelf stuff.
Yeah, it's inherently unique for sure, because you're not getting the blending aspect of it is sort of out the window, and so you really get something that can stand out from the normal portfolio of a company. So those are great answers. Widowmaker question: if you could have a drink with anybody, past or present, who would it be? Where would you go? What would you drink? Just kind of paint us a picture.
It'd probably be my grandfather. He passed away, was killed in a car accident when I was like 7. So I never really got to know him as an adult or have real adult, conversations, family history and philosophies and things like that. Like it for sure would be outside, nice weather, not too hot, enjoying a cigar. I knew he was an avid cigar smoker as well. I'd be having a bourbon and I'd make him whatever he wanted and just kind of find out everything I missed and didn't, wasn't able to know. I hear stories and it may not be the sexiest answer about, someone famous or anything like that, but just something that that's probably where I would go first. My grandfather outside, having a cigar, nice weather, just enjoying the company and getting to know things that, learning some stuff that I never knew.
Bourbon is definitely one of these spirits that sort of evokes the sense of family. So many of them are named after, old families in the bourbon world. So, it seems to be a value that's pretty universally shared among bourbon lovers. So, Brent, this has been really, really educational for me. I've had a blast having you on. Before we sign off here, can you just let people know how to connect with you in the digital space, as well as the best way to engage with Bourbon and Banter?
Sure. You can go to the Bourbon and Banter website, bourbonbanter.com. You can reach out directly through me there. All the social media links are also on there. But Twitter is BJ Hawk. The number 4 KU, so BJHAWK, number 4 KU, and Instagram is just BJ Hawk, BJHAWK. I'm on Facebook, Brent Joseph, and that's pretty much, I think that's all. Is that the major ones, right?
Yeah, yep. And of course, we will link to the articles over on the show notes page at modernbarcart.com/podcast. So once again, Brent, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Eric, thanks so much for having me.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's 2 big things you can do for us here at Modern Bar Cart. One would be to tell your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy listening to us talk about cocktails. And if they don't download podcasts, they can always stream our episodes on their desktop directly from the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. The other thing you can do to help would be to head on over to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars are great, but we're more interested in your feedback. And the beauty is, the more reviews we have, the easier it will be for other folks out there to learn about our show. We're trying to start a cocktail revolution here, and by spreading the word, you're helping us fight the good fight. You can always reach us by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com if you're looking for cocktail or bartending advice, or if you're a pro who would like to pull up a mic and be interviewed for all to hear. Also, definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Modern Bar Cart for cocktail porn, recipes, and entertaining tips. And keep an eye out for new product releases and special offers, which are happening all the time. We love our listeners, and we really enjoy giving you exclusive discounts and sneak peeks at our latest and greatest cocktail projects. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and adventures are just beginning, so remember, folks, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was made possible with editing and sound design by Samantha Reed, Bourbon Insights and Market Analysis by Brent Joseph, and a little bit of interview magic by yours truly. This has been a Modern Bar Cart production, copyright 2021.